It feels like it's been a little while since I've done something PlayStation related. Or really much at all, because, the sun's out, sport is on, and I've been rooting for football to come home. Alas, it hasn't come home. So what do you do once the game's over and you hear those oh so familiar words, England are out of the World Cup? Well, you go out into the sun, pumped up on lager, and you have a fight. Well, I personally don't, but there's certainly people that do. It is a common British pastime. And with that tenuous link out of the way, it's time to look at some classic PlayStation fighting games. From the time when we all thought that 2D was going the way of the dodo, the PS1's an interesting platform to look at the fighting games on, seeing as a lot of them are 3D and several feature full 3D movement. The balance was restored back to 2D somewhat in later generations. And so you certainly get some interesting and even great, unique affairs. Anyway, let's not waste any more time. As is often the case, there's only going to be one entry for a major series, and the games we've got are certainly quite varied. So, let's go. I felt it was important to have at least one of Takara's Toshinden games on here. Battle Arena Toshinden was the first fighting game on the console, even before Tekken. Of course, Tekken would eclipse it pretty early on, leaving these games as fairly obscure. However, of the trio, I do still dig Battle Arena Toshinden 2 a fair bit, enough for it to snatch 10th place. Is it a good game? Well, not really. I mean, aesthetically the animation and movement is all over the place, jerky and robotic like nobody's business. You can really laugh at it sometimes. The fighting is still kinda fun though. This game had sidesteps long before Tekken, and it even has super moves to boot. This is the just right one. The first one in particular, coming from 1994, is way too ugly even for me. However, this one is just fine, and I can still get a kick out of it. When you compare the game we've just seen to the original Dead or Alive, released by Tecmo around 4 years later, you kinda see just how far things have come. Obviously this is much smoother and the people actually do look, well, human. Even if this is of course the game known for comical bouncing bazoongas, but there is more of a purpose when it comes to how the game plays as well. Dead or Alive is fast, turtling up is useless, you want to attack quick and hard, blocking is a last resort when really you need to be parrying in order to play at a good level. It's simpler even than Tekken, with only one button for punch, kick and guard. Some back in the day may have accused it of lacking substance, especially when paired up with those gnarlacious norks on the ladies' chests, but this game was seriously addictive. I played DOA a lot on PS1. Hell, I think I managed to unlock every costume back in the day just so I could unlock Ayane, and that was a lot of completions, let me tell you. But with that in mind, Dead or Alive only made it to number 9. I think it's fair to say that while the original's cool and all, the series only got better over time, which perhaps hurts this one a little bit. I still think it's fun, I love blasting people up in the air, but I've played a fair few games for this list and ultimately this teenage fave got pushed down. But still, good memories. Not to mention utterly bedazzling dumplings. Obviously, basically any fighting game list is going to have Street Fighter on it. But here it's only number 8? How come? I mean, it's not like I don't get a kick out of Street Fighter Alpha 3, it's easily my favourite of all of the alphas. There's so many characters, there's some weird little unlockables like the dramatic battle, and obviously that superb gameplay is all present and correct. I mean, it's Street Fighter after all. You won't catch me saying many bad words about this game, not even when it comes to that silly announcer. I mean, who doesn't love Triumph or Die? And yet Street Fighter is only at number 8. Why? Well, it may make more sense if I also say that Alpha 3, a game that I had back in the day and really enjoyed for sure, is also the only 2D game on the whole list. As alluded to in the opening, the PlayStation wasn't the ideal machine for 2D fighters. It wasn't bad, but we all know by now that the Saturn was better. Other 2D games could have easily made it. Darkstalkers, Children of the Atom, Marvel Superheroes, but all of those games are also on Saturn, and they kinda fit a lot better there. And so, in order to concentrate on the 3D fighters that were more prominent on the PS1, this is the only one. I mean, I guess I could have put Street Fighter EX in instead. Or, actually, you know, I wouldn't do that ever. Let's just move on. A lot of people bought this one, make no mistake. However, I don't know how many actually played it. Squaresoft's Tobal No. 1 is mostly known in the US for what else was inside the box, a playable demo of Final Fantasy VII that certainly helped shift copies. However, the game itself is actually pretty good. It comes from the mind of Seiichi Ishii, a guy who was instrumental in developing both Virtua Fighter and Tekken, so the pedigree certainly can't be questioned. Tobal is very different from both these games. It's a lot easier to move around the 3D space, and of all the games on here, it's undoubtedly the one that's mostly focused on grappling, with a complex system of different positions, reversals into those positions, and multiple throws and attacks from the grab, much different than simply hitting a button combo and executing a throw. It has a unique look, big polygons and hefty goo-odd shades courtesy of Akira Toriyama, he of Dragon's both Quest and Ball. It is an odd game in many respects. The dungeon crawling quest mode is certainly one of the stranger add-ons to a fighting game out there. Some of the character designs are amusingly whacked, and one of the characters has a move where he quite literally commits suicide. But Tobal is really fun. There's a lot more to it than simply being a conduit for a demo of what was, at that point, possibly the most hyped game of all time. Oh yeah. Does it really get better than Soul Blade's intro? I mean, isn't it just the best? That rockin' power metal makes it perhaps the most nostalgic PS1 intro video of them all, and honestly it would have merited a place in the top 10 based on the video alone. But it does help that Soul Blade, better known in America and the arcades as Soul Edge of course, is damn good. Much like Dead or Alive, one could argue that the original has been superseded. Soul Calibur on the Dreamcast was most certainly a whole different level from this. But there is a charm to the original game still. Is it the incredibly bright and vivid colours it pulls out of the PS1? Is it the announcer welcoming you to the stage of history? The straightforward and yet satisfyingly brutal nature of the fighting? There's many things that makes this game shine, not least the Edge Master mode, which adds a solid amount of beef to the usual arcade tournament. Soul Blade is admittedly a seriously nostalgic game for me. It was a definite arcade favourite, one that I was actually good at back in the day too. It was a must play whenever I saw it, and being able to play a perfect version at home is one of the many reasons I love the PS1 so much. Sure, later games were better, but our first look at Siegfried, Sophitia, Mitsurugi and the almighty Voldo is still bloody brilliant regardless. Up next, a game that came absolutely from out of nowhere. Back in PS1 times it seemed clear enough that fighting games belonged to Japan, especially after Mortal Kombat laid an egg with the lousy 4th game and the hideous mythologies. Indeed, the upcoming game is the only Western fighting game to make the top 10. Most Western fighters just weren't very good. They often featured free movement, which was at least interesting, but the actual mechanics just weren't there. A bunch of guys called Paradox, not the ones you know from Crusader Kings and what have you, were often at fault, having made both Wu-Tang Shaolin style, or Taste the Pain if you're English, and the never released yet infamous Thrill Kill, both of which are kind of stinkers. Later they'd go on to such classics as the Backyard Wrestling series. Not exactly a glittering softography then. And yet, there was one time where they hit gold from out of nothing. September 2001, right at the end of the PS1's days. X-Men Mutant Academy 2. It's published by Activision, it's a frickin' licensed game, it's 2D 3D and the original was okay but pretty damn similar to Street Fighter, and yet here they got it spot on. This game is quite simply so much frickin' fun. It allows you to string utterly spectacular combos together, flying way up in the air, nailing super moves and just going back and forth. It's quite addictive indeed. The characters so fun and varied with their moves that you just want to keep playing. I had to stop myself simply because, well, I didn't need all that much footage for a top 10. Of course, it's heavily Street Fighter based, it uses Street Fighter special moves and everything. But it doesn't matter, somehow these guys managed to nail it, all in this licensed game from the very arse end of the 32-bit generation. Naturally, they never managed to do it again, but this game, with a full roster of awesome characters, as well as a hidden Spider-Man, simply because, well, that's what games did in those days, is a belter, and pretty much worth playing if you have any love for fighting games at all. Okay, now we're really getting into the nitty gritty. If you know your PS1 fighters, you may well have figured out the big guns that are left to play. But what order do they come in? Bloody War 2 is up first, 18 and Rising's thoroughly mad and spectacular game that may well have set an entire generation of people on a journey towards extreme yiffage. There was often a tendency in the 3D fighters to try for realism, to thumb a nose up at the fireballs and teleports of yesteryear. You see a lot of this in some of this generation's dollar games, but the best of them managed to strike a balance between realism and fantasy. Bloody War 2 leans more towards the latter, but in a gabbled sort of way it makes perfect sense. Look, it's all about the beast mode. You build your meter up, and then when the time is right, you power up. As your character's beast, your attacks are different and stronger, to the point where you can send poor unfortunates quite literally flying. I cannot fully convey how satisfying it is to pull a fight back from the brink by beasting it up, rushing an opponent, and sending them careering out of the arena. It's balletic, it's gloriously violent, it's so damn good. Bloody War was an odd one back in the day, especially here. I'm not sure how many people knew it at all when it hit the PS1. It was an arcade game, but well, arcades were lorded over by Tekken. But reviews and people were curious, and they just kept coming back for more. It's kind of a shame it never managed to make it beyond the PS2 generation. God knows I'd love to see what a Bloody War game would look like now, because, well, the originals still look amazing today. For all of Street Fighter's greatness, it's no surprise that the highest Capcom game on the list is Rival Schools. This game has taken on a special sort of place. It wasn't a big arcade hit, but still got ported to the PS1, and despite a brilliant premise and, well, just being a damn good game, it never left this generation. It got a sequel on the Dreamcast, but that was it. It's 32-bit forever. As such, the game is highly sought after. It's retained its original price and then some, and will cost you a pretty penny. But if you like fighting games, then, well, it's undoubtedly worth it. Rival Schools took a formula that was working damn well in the Marvel vs. Capcom games: teams. While you can only switch characters between rounds, there's plenty of ways characters can deal damage, including the fantastic team-up moves. There's a Vigor bar that allows for some amazing hits, combos all over the shop, other useful tech like tardy counters and cancels. It's as complex and as good a fighting game as you would expect a Capcom title to be. Still, Rival Schools really shines in the story department, which is kind of unusual for a fighter. The premise is so good, one of those classic hot-blooded Japanese youth tales, where teams from schools team up and take on each other, with the requisite salty dialogue between stages. It does feel kinda like a Kunio-kun tribute at times. The story mode is great, and the PS1 release even comes with an entire second disc packed with minigames and character creation. It'd be good enough with just the game, but the amount that goes into the port makes it a classic. Rival Schools is as damn good as its high price would suggest, in short, and definitely not a game to be ignored. It'd probably beat the crap out of you if you did. Shock. Horror. But this is my personal list after all. If this were a generic list of what everyone thinks are the best PS1 fighting games, there's no way that Tekken 3 wouldn't be at the top. This was the PS1 fighting game, the one that everyone had. Make no mistake, I love Tekken. I've loved it since the first time I played it in a bowling alley, and played the hell out of the second one too. But this has kind of always been the one. It wasn't until the most recent game that I really had another similar experience with Tekken. Tekken is pretty much the architect of what I talked about in the Bloody War video, a certain realism. 4 attack buttons, each assigned to different limbs of the body, and the actions you perform on your pad roughly translating into what you see on screen. Tekken was and remains a game all about momentum. If you screw up and get caught in a combo, then that may well be enough to take you out completely. There's tons of grabs, chains, juggles, so many attacks to master. It can take a while just to learn one character, let alone all of them. Since day one, I've always been Kin. Never a good Kin, but here's my go-to. Yes, my matches mostly consist of being on the ground doing stagger kicks, even if such things are easily punishable when blocked. But hey, I mean, he's a wrestler with a realistic Jaguar mask on, so why wouldn't I pick him? And the game's full of such awesome characters in the whole Kin of the Iron Fist tournament, with all the lore that comes with it. There are so many reasons to love this one. The killer music, the additions like sidesteps which make it pretty close to the game that's still loved today, the Tekken Force mode of course. I mean, Tekken 7 is bloody brilliant, of course, but historically, this is still the best Tekken. It just has to be. So before we reveal my number 1, I do have some, well, not honourable mentions, but a couple of other games I played for this list. You know, just to see what I could fill it out with. Such processes do bring surprises, but other times, the results can be disappointing. So let's have a look at our also rans. Now look, I was perhaps a little harsh on Street Fighter EX earlier. I mean, it's not actually a bad game or anything. It's essentially Street Fighter only in 3D. The trouble with it really is that being 3D, it's a lot slower than what you're used to with Turbo and Alpha and all that, which kind of changes the feel of it. It would be a good while more before SF actually did make the transition to 3D and nail it. Next up, one of those interesting facts. The first Dynasty Warriors game was completely different to all the others. Did you know that it was a fighting game? The first title allows you to play as Guan Yu, Taishi C, and all your other favourites directly against each other. Alas though, it's also really bad. It's incredibly sluggish and unresponsive, unfun, poor man's Soul Blade. Back to the drawing board then, but amazing to think that from Lee's inauspicious beginnings, Koei and Amiga Force would hit pay dirt as soon as the very next instalment. Ah, Air Geese. I longed after this game back in the day. I was a Final Fantasy VII nut, and this was a fighting game with Cloud, Tifa and Sephiroth in it? Sign me up! Unfortunately, the game wasn't ever released in Europe, and I've never really played it until now. And I'm disappointed. It's full 3D but very poorly implemented. It's kinda hard to actually target people. And the weapons can make it very imbalanced. I mean, geez, Cloud basically kills everything with his Buster Sword. It just doesn't work. Cardinal Sin did a better job of making a full 3D game. I mean, at least it's easier to target people there. Oh, speaking of which, here it is. I played this a fair bit on demo back in the day. It's from the same folks who made Criticom and Dark Rift, so consider this their representative. I like that there's live stages with traps, potions and so on, and it doesn't actually look half bad, but it's just a bit limited in terms of moves and that. It kinda wants to be a full 3D Mortal Kombat, but you need super speed for that. This doesn't have it. In the end, it's utterly average. Finally here, well, we have to look at Evil Zone. From Ukes by way of the almighty Titus, Evil Zone is arguably the weirdest PS1 fighting game in every single way. The system uses 2 buttons, attack and guard. That's it. Not that there isn't a load of attacks, but they're all controlled through directions, charging, various other things. And they're kind of crazy particle-laden affairs to boot. The concept of Evil Zone was, apparently, to recreate the sort of fights you'd see in anime as opposed to actual fighting, and I guess it works in that regard. As limited as it seems though, I don't get it. And I've not even got into the characters and the anime serial concept. Obviously you can't not love Gali Banish Gregman, a huge bounty hunter who fires missiles out of his chest, likes to drink a lot, and is voiced by Paul Iden, aka the frickin' Colonel from Metal Gear Solid. If only the game was good, I'd have to find a place for it in the top 5. But if you want to see what this weirdness is really about, go check out a long play at the usual place. Or indeed, check out the riffs on the game that old Retsupreme did a few years back. For now though, it's time for the number one game. If you know me, then you probably knew that this was always going to be at the top. It has to be Bushido Blade. From lightweight by way of square, Bushido Blade is utterly different to all of the other games here. Sure, we've seen plenty of games with weapons, but this isn't like them. Soul Blade treats Siegfried carving fools up with a gargantuan greatsword like it's little but a scratch. If he did that here, well, fight's over. Bushido Blade is a true sword fight. No energy bar. If you get a good hit, then you win. And for me, it's basically flawless and has forever been one of my all-time favourite games, full stop. First you pick your fighter, then you pick your weapon. Make note that all fighters have weapons that they're particularly comfortable with. My personal go-to is Red Shadow and the Saber, a character I know better than any other character in any fighting game. A fight in this game lasts as long as it takes. It could be 10 seconds, it could be 2 minutes, it could be longer. If I can, I like to finish fights with a single clean combo. It's all about timing, pacing, picking a perfect moment where you not only counter the enemy, but kill them, knowing that if you screw up they can just as easily do the same. Everything about the game is tense, the natural sounds and clash of swords replacing music, and the wait before you unleash, strike like a cobra. There is nothing quite as satisfying as finishing a fight in the most complete way. It ebbs and flows like no other, and even being crippled does not mean you're out of it. Bushido Blade has some strange foibles, of course. There's the code of honour, which must be followed in story mode, where you can't hit in the back, can't hit before someone's ready, can't hit someone lying down, and so on. Mind you, you can do all this in the 100-man slash mode, or any other mode really. There's the odd process you go through to get a character's true ending, and just the general concept. A concept that, in the end, was a one-hit wonder. The sequel just didn't have this game's balance or atmosphere, and it evolved into the Kengo series in later generations. I played the first Kengo on PS2, and rate it as the single least fun fighting game I have ever played. There has never been a successor to the original Bushido Blade that managed to, quite simply, be perfect. And it's my all-time favourite multiplayer game too, so there's really no way it couldn't have been number one. It's been at the top since 1998. Utterly remarkable, and utterly deserving of it. And with that, the list is over. Hope you enjoyed it. Perhaps there'll be some more top 10s soon. But for now, I'm going to say, bye for now. Sign off could have been better, couldn't it? Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, then you could subscribe, leave comments, like, and indeed support me on Patreon. If you do, you could join this list here of awesome people whom the community would like to thank. Adam Schaefer, Alex Stocco, Alexander Jazeri, Andrew Dalton, Andy Capt, Daniel Briggs, Daniel David Taylor, David Rose, Dustin Cooper, Gary Pinkett, George Newton, Grafham Blackpool, Ian Roberts, James Idd, James Loveridge, Jason Durso, Jason Goy, Jason Stevens, Jace Alexander, Josh Jensen, Lee Norris, Mark Greaves, Martin Pataki, Mike's Games Room, Morton Scarnin, Nanette McCrone, Nicholas Tristan, Olaf Albeen, Peter Jack, Peter Sidorn, Phil Taprog, Potter Margel, Pocky Southmaid, Rachel Maxwell, Romeo, Ryan Burford, Sammy Lee, Samuel Victor, Scott Coulter, Seth Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Stephen Warner, Tanya Jay, Yucca Operator, and Zach Roach.